December 18, 2024, 2:47 a.m., Bitterroot Wilderness, Montana.
The temperature had dropped to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit when Wyatt Chen first saw the blood. It stretched across fresh snow in a crimson ribbon, dark and still steaming in the frozen air. The trail led away from Marker Point, disappearing into dense pines where the wind screamed through branches like something alive and angry. Wyatt had been a wilderness ranger for 11 years, and in that time he'd seen plenty of blood trails. Deer taken down by mountain lions, elk wounded by illegal hunters. Once, a black bear that had lost a fight over territory. But this was different. The pattern was wrong. Too much blood for a prey animal running, not enough panic in the track marks. Whatever had left this trail was moving with purpose, dragging itself forward despite catastrophic injury. And that kind of determination usually meant one thing. It was trying to reach safety before it died. If you're watching this because incredible survival stories move you, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what time and city you're tuning in from. Now, let's continue. Wyatt adjusted the straps on his pack and checked his radio. Static. The storm had knocked out communications 2 hours ago, which was why he was out here in the first place. A distress beacon had gone off near Marker Point at 11 p.m., probably hikers caught off guard by the blizzard. He'd been searching for 3 hours and found nothing but wind and snow, and now this blood trail that made his gut tighten with something between dread and curiosity. He was 34 years old, stood 6'2", with black hair usually tied back in a short ponytail, and a face that bore the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. His ranger station was 12 miles south, a small cabin with a wood stove and satellite internet that worked maybe half the time. He lived alone, preferred it that way. People were complicated, mountains were honest. The blood trail led him deeper into the pines, away from the main search grid. Wyatt knew he should mark his position, call it in when communications restored, follow protocol. But protocol assumed you had backup within reach. Out here, he was the backup. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that stopped Wyatt cold. A whimper, low and ragged and unmistakably canine. He moved forward, slower now, one hand on the bear spray at his hip. The trees opened into a small clearing where the snow had drifted against a fallen log, and there, pressed into the hollow beneath the log, was a wolf. No, not just a wolf, a white wolf. Wyatt had seen exactly 2 white wolves in his entire career, both from a distance, both gone before he could properly document them. White wolves weren't albinos, they were Arctic wolves, and they had no business being this far south. Yet here one was, and it was dying. The wolf's left hind leg was mangled, caught in what looked like the aftermath of a leg-hold trap. The metal was gone, probably chewed through, but the damage remained. Bone gleamed white against torn muscle and matted fur. The animal had lost so much blood that the snow around it looked like a crime scene. But what caught Wyatt's breath wasn't the injury, it was the eyes. Amber, bright and clear and locked on him with an intelligence that felt almost human. The wolf didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth, just watched him with an expression that Wyatt would later describe as resignation, as if it had used its last strength to reach this spot and now waited to see whether death would come from cold or from the human standing 10 feet away. "Easy," Wyatt said softly, though he had no idea if the wolf could understand tone. "Easy, I'm not here to hurt you." The wolf's ears flicked, its breathing was shallow, rapid. Shock, Wyatt recognized. The animal was shutting down. He should walk away. That was the smart choice, the safe choice. Interfering with wildlife was technically illegal without proper authorization, and getting between a wounded predator and its fate was a good way to lose a hand. But Wyatt had already pulled his pack off and was digging through his emergency medical kit before his brain caught up with his instincts. The wolf watched him approach, still didn't growl. When Wyatt knelt in the snow 3 feet away, the animal's tail gave the faintest twitch, and Wyatt realized with a shock that it was a wag. Barely there, weak as a dying heartbeat, but definitely a wag. "You're domesticated," Wyatt breathed. "Someone raised you." That changed everything. This wasn't just a wild wolf caught in a trap. This was someone's animal, probably escaped from a sanctuary or a private facility. The lack of ear tags suggested illegal ownership, but that was a problem for later. Right now, the problem was simple: stop the bleeding or watch it die. Wyatt worked fast. He'd done wilderness first aid on humans, never on a wolf, but the principles were the same. Pressure to stop the hemorrhaging, antiseptic to prevent infection, bandaging to stabilize the limb. The wolf lay completely still throughout, only flinching when Wyatt had to manipulate the broken bone back into rough alignment. "I know," Wyatt murmured as he worked. "I know it hurts. Just hold on." The wolf's breathing steadied slightly. Its eyes never left Wyatt's face. By the time Wyatt finished, his hands were numb despite his gloves, and the first aid kit looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. He'd used every bandage, all the antiseptic, and most of his personal water supply to clean the wound. The wolf's leg was wrapped tight, stabilized with a splint made from duct tape and a broken tent pole. It wasn't professional veterinary care, but it might be enough. The problem now was moving the animal. The wolf had to weigh 90 pounds, maybe more, and Wyatt was already exhausted from 3 hours of searching in sub-zero temperatures. But leaving the animal here meant death by exposure within the hour. "We're going to have to work together on this," Wyatt said, and pulled out his emergency bivy sack. It was meant to keep humans warm in survival situations, but it would work as a makeshift sled. The wolf didn't resist when Wyatt carefully maneuvered it onto the bivy, didn't snap when Wyatt had to lift its injured leg, just watched him with those amber eyes and made a sound low in its throat that might have been a whine or might have been something else entirely. Wyatt tied the corners of the bivy to his pack straps and started pulling. The trip back to the ranger station took 4 hours. Wyatt had to stop every 15 minutes to check the wolf's vitals and adjust the makeshift sled. The storm worsened, wind chill dropping to -40. Twice, Wyatt lost the trail and had to backtrack. His GPS died. His flashlight batteries gave up. But the wolf kept breathing. By the time Wyatt kicked open the door to his cabin, it was nearly 7 a.m. and he couldn't feel his feet. He dragged the bivy inside and collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. The wolf lay where he'd left it, still wrapped in the emergency blanket, frost coating its white fur. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the wolf's tail thumped once against the floor. Wyatt laughed, surprised by how much that small gesture meant. "Yeah," he said, "we made it." Over the next 3 days, Wyatt called in sick for the first time in his career. He told his supervisor he'd caught something during the storm search, which wasn't entirely a lie. He definitely caught something. It just happened to have 4 legs and amber eyes. The wolf slept for most of the first day, curled on a pile of blankets by the wood stove. Wyatt checked the bandages every 4 hours, changed them when they soaked through, and monitored for signs of infection. On the second day, the wolf's eyes opened with more clarity, and it accepted small pieces of raw venison from Wyatt's freezer. By the third day, the wolf was attempting to stand. "Not yet," Wyatt said firmly, gently pressing the animal back down. "Give it another week at least." The wolf huffed but settled. Wyatt named him Frost, partially for his white coat, partially for the storm that had brought them together. It felt right. The wolf responded to it immediately, ears perking whenever Wyatt said the name. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Wyatt would wake at dawn, start the fire, prepare breakfast for both of them. Frost preferred his meat raw, but would occasionally accept cooked venison if Wyatt added bone broth. They'd spend mornings in quiet companionship, Wyatt reading incident reports, while Frost watched the snow fall outside the window. Afternoons meant physical therapy. Wyatt would help Frost stand, support his weight, while the injured leg slowly remembered how to bear pressure. Progress was agonizing, measured in inches and whimpers, but progress nonetheless. Evenings were Wyatt's favorite. He'd sit by the fire with a book, and Frost would rest his massive head on Wyatt's knee, amber eyes, reflecting the flames. Sometimes Wyatt would talk about his day, his frustrations with bureaucracy, his love for the mountains. Frost would listen with an attention that felt almost human. "You know I can't keep you," Wyatt said one night, 6 weeks after finding Frost. The wolf's leg had healed remarkably well, leaving only a slight limp. "You're wild. You belong out there." Frost's ears flattened, and he pressed closer against Wyatt's leg. "I mean it. Another few weeks and you'll be strong enough. I'll take you far from any traps, far from people. You'll find your pack." If Frost had an opinion on that, he kept it to himself. The night everything changed came in late February. Wyatt woke to Frost pacing by the door, whining low in his throat. It was 2 a.m., the cabin dark except for dying embers in the stove. "What is it?" Wyatt asked, groggy. Frost scratched at the door, urgent. Wyatt pulled on his boots and coat and opened the door. The night was clear, stars sharp as broken glass in a black sky. The temperature had dropped again, easily -30, and in the distance, barely audible, came a sound that raised the hair on Wyatt's neck. Howling. Multiple voices, wild and haunting. Frost stood rigid in the doorway, every muscle tensed. His tail was straight, ears forward. The howling came again, closer now, and Frost answered with a sound Wyatt had never heard him make before. Deep and resonant and achingly lonely. The wild pack answered. "That's them," Wyatt said quietly. "That's your family, isn't it?" Frost looked back at him, and in those amber eyes, Wyatt saw something that broke his heart. Longing, recognition, the pull of something ancient and undeniable. "Go on," Wyatt said, stepping aside. "It's okay. Go." Frost took one step onto the porch, then another. Then he looked back again, and Wyatt swore the wolf was asking permission. "I'll be fine," Wyatt lied. "You belong with them." Frost hesitated one more moment. Then he was gone, a white shadow disappearing into darkness, following those wild voices that spoke to something in his blood. Wyatt stood on the porch until he couldn't hear the howling anymore, until the cold drove him back inside, until the emptiness of the cabin became too much to bear. He didn't sleep that night. The next 3 months passed in a grey blur. Wyatt returned to work, filed his reports, conducted his patrols. Rangers at neighbouring stations asked about his quiet mood, but he brushed them off. What was he supposed to say? That he missed a wolf? That every night he listened for howling that never came? That he'd saved a wild animal's life and somehow, in the process, the animal had saved something in him too. March gave way to April. Snow began melting in the lower elevations, exposing the bones of winter. Wyatt threw himself into work, volunteering for the worst assignments, the longest hikes, anything to avoid the empty cabin and the pile of blankets he couldn't bring himself to throw away. On April 3rd, Wyatt was assigned to check avalanche conditions on the north face of Granite Peak. It was a routine assessment, the kind he'd done hundreds of times. The weather was clear, the snow stable according to all forecasts. He'd be back by dinner. He was halfway up the slope when the world exploded. The sound came first, a crack like a rifle shot, then a roar that swallowed the world. Wyatt had exactly 1 second to recognize what was happening before the mountain moved. Avalanche. The snow hit him like a freight train, lifting him off his feet and tumbling him downward in a chaos of white. He couldn't tell up from down, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His training screamed at him to swim, to fight toward the surface. But there was no surface anymore. Just crushing weight and burning cold, and the terrible knowledge that he was being buried alive. When the movement stopped, Wyatt was upside down, packed in snow so tight he couldn't move his arms. His right leg was twisted at an angle that sent lightning bolts of agony through his nervous system. Blood filled his mouth, metallic and warm. He'd bitten through his tongue. The silence after the avalanche was worse than the noise, complete and absolute and suffocating. Wyatt tried to calm his breathing, tried to remember the survival protocols he'd taught dozens of times. Create an air pocket, conserve oxygen, wait for rescue. But his radio was somewhere above him, probably crushed. His emergency beacon might be transmitting, might not. The snow compressed his chest with every breath, making each one shallower than the last. He had maybe 20 minutes before oxygen deprivation caused permanent brain damage, maybe 40 before his heart stopped. Nobody knew he was here. He'd logged his route, but the avalanche had carried him at least 300 yards off course. The search grid wouldn't include this location for days. Wyatt closed his eyes and thought about Frost, about amber eyes reflecting firelight, about the trust in that gaze when the wolf had let him approach, about the weight of that massive head on his knee during quiet evenings. "I should have told you," Wyatt whispered into the darkness. "Should have told you that you saved me first." He didn't know how long he'd been buried when he heard it. Scratching, distant at first, then closer, frantic and desperate, and accompanied by a sound that made Wyatt's heart stop. Whining. No, impossible. Wolves didn't dig people out of avalanches. Wolves ran from humans, avoided them, certainly didn't risk their own lives for them. But the scratching intensified, and Wyatt felt movement above him. Snow shifting, pressure releasing slightly on his chest. Light, impossibly bright after the darkness, filtered through cracks in the snow. Then a nose, black and wet, pressed against his face. "Frost?" Wyatt's voice came out as a croak. The whining became more urgent. Frost dug harder, his powerful legs throwing snow in all directions. Wyatt could see him now through the gap, white fur stark against blue sky, working with a single-minded determination that bordered on frenzy. It took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of Frost digging and whining, and occasionally pressing his nose against Wyatt's face, as if to say, "Still here, still breathing, hold on." When the gap was finally wide enough, Frost grabbed Wyatt's jacket collar in his jaws and pulled. Wyatt screamed as his broken leg shifted, but Frost didn't let go. He pulled with strength that seemed impossible for an animal that had nearly died 3 months ago, dragging Wyatt up through the snow until they both collapsed on the surface. Wyatt lay gasping, staring at the sky, unable to process what had just happened. Frost stood over him, panting heavily, snow coating his white fur until he looked like part of the mountain itself. "You came back," Wyatt whispered. "How did you know?" Frost lowered his head and pressed his forehead against Wyatt's chest, right over his heart. The gesture was so deliberate, so clearly intentional, that Wyatt felt tears freeze on his face. But Frost's work wasn't done. He circled Wyatt once, assessing, then threw back his head and howled. The sound echoed across the valley, rising and falling in a pattern that felt like language. And the mountain answered. 4 more wolves emerged from the tree line, 3 grey, 1 darker. They moved cautiously, clearly uncertain about the human, but they followed Frost without hesitation. The pack surrounded Wyatt, and Frost barked once, sharp and commanding. What happened next would be something Wyatt struggled to explain for the rest of his life. The pack formed a circle around him, their bodies blocking the wind. Frost lay down directly against Wyatt's left side, sharing body heat. The others pressed close, creating a living blanket of fur and warmth. They stayed like that for over an hour, not moving, barely shifting, just breathing in unison, while Wyatt's body temperature slowly stabilized. When Frost finally stood, it was with clear purpose. He barked at the other wolves, and 2 of them moved to flank Wyatt. Frost grabbed Wyatt's jacket sleeve in his teeth and pulled. The message was unmistakable. "You need to move." "I can't," Wyatt said. "My leg." Frost growled, low and insistent. Somehow, Wyatt found the strength. Using Frost as support on one side and a grey wolf on the other, he managed to stand on his good leg. The pain from his broken leg was blinding, but the wolves held steady, taking his weight. They moved as a unit. Frost led, breaking trail through the deep snow. The 2 wolves supported Wyatt, adjusting their pace to match his agonizing hobble. The other 2 ranged behind and ahead, keeping watch. It should have been impossible. A man with a shattered leg, traveling 3 miles through backcountry in sub-zero temperatures, supported by wild wolves. But impossible or not, it happened. They reached Wyatt's cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and red. Frost waited until Wyatt was safely inside before stepping back. The other wolves had already retreated to the tree line, uncomfortable with the human structure. Wyatt collapsed just inside the door, breathing hard. "Stay," he managed. "Please, just for tonight." Frost's ears flicked. He looked back at his pack, waiting in the shadows. Then he looked at Wyatt, and something passed between them. An understanding that went deeper than species, stronger than instinct. Frost howled once, long and clear. His pack answered. Then, slowly, deliberately, Frost crossed the threshold and lay down beside Wyatt, close enough that Wyatt could feel the warmth of his breathing. The other wolves didn't follow, but they didn't leave either. Through the window, Wyatt could see them settling in around the cabin, creating a perimeter. "Guard wolves," Wyatt said, half delirious with pain and shock, and something that might have been joy. "I have guard wolves." Frost's tail thumped against the floor. Wyatt managed to drag himself to the radio and send a distress call. His voice was weak, words slurring, but he got the important parts across. Avalanche, injured, needs immediate medical evacuation. The dispatcher promised a helicopter at first light. That night was the longest of Wyatt's life. The pain from his leg was excruciating, coming in waves that left him gasping and sweating despite the cold. He couldn't reach his medical supplies, couldn't do anything except lie on the floor and try not to scream. But Frost stayed. Every time Wyatt's breathing became too rapid, too panicked, Frost would press his nose against Wyatt's face. Every time Wyatt's body started shivering uncontrollably, Frost would lie closer, sharing warmth. Around 2 a.m., when Wyatt's fever spiked and delirium set in, Frost placed one massive paw on Wyatt's chest and didn't move it until the fever broke. The helicopter arrived at 6:47 a.m. The medics found Wyatt semi-conscious, hypothermic, with a compound fracture and early signs of shock. They also found 5 wolves surrounding the cabin, utterly silent, watching with eyes that gleamed in the early morning light. "Sir, we can't land with those animals there," the pilot radioed down. Inside the cabin, Frost raised his head. He looked at Wyatt one last time, then stood and walked to the door. Wyatt watched through tears as Frost howled once more, calling his pack. The wolves melted into the forest like smoke, leaving only tracks in the snow. The medics loaded Wyatt onto a stretcher and carried him to the helicopter. As they lifted off, Wyatt pressed his face against the window, searching the tree line. There, a flash of white among the pines. Frost stood watching, his pack gathered around him. As the helicopter gained altitude, Frost threw back his head and howled, and the sound followed Wyatt into unconsciousness like a promise. The hospital in Missoula kept Wyatt for 3 weeks. Surgery to repair his leg, antibiotics for the infection that set in despite treatment, physical therapy to regain mobility. The story of his rescue spread through the ranger network, then to local media, then beyond. "Man saved by pack of wolves," read one headline. "White wolf rescues ranger who saved its life," read another. Reporters called constantly, wanting interviews, wanting details, wanting to turn his experience into something sensational. Wyatt refused them all. What happened on that mountain wasn't entertainment. It was sacred. It was a debt repaid and a bond acknowledged, and something that existed in a space between human and wild that defied easy explanation. His supervisor, a gruff man named Dutch Keller, who'd been ranging for 30 years, visited on the 4th day. He sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair and studied Wyatt for a long moment. "The search team went back," Dutch said finally. "Found where the avalanche hit you. Found where something dug you out." He paused. "Found wolf tracks. A lot of them. Leading from the dig site all the way to your cabin." Wyatt said nothing. "Normally," Dutch continued, "I'd write you up for keeping an unregistered wild animal at your station. But given that the animal apparently saved your life..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I'm not going to ask questions I don't want answers to. Just tell me one thing. Is it over? Is the wolf gone?" "Yes," Wyatt said, and felt the truth of it settle in his chest like a stone. "He's gone back to his pack, where he belongs." Dutch nodded slowly. "Good. That's good." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Chen, I've been doing this job for 3 decades, seen a lot of strange things in these mountains, but what you and that wolf have, that's something else. That's the kind of thing that reminds me why we do this work in the first place." After Dutch left, Wyatt stared at the ceiling and thought about Frost. About whether the wolf was eating enough, staying safe, teaching his pack that not all humans were threats. About whether Frost ever thought about those quiet evenings by the fire, or whether wild things didn't have memory that way. The answer came 2 months later. Wyatt had been cleared to return to light duty, though his leg would never be quite right again. He walked with a slight limp now, needed a brace for long hikes, had to give up backcountry solo patrols. The higher-ups had offered him a desk job in Missoula. He turned it down. Mountains were where he belonged, even if he couldn't range them the way he used to. He was at his cabin on a warm June evening, sitting on the porch with a book he wasn't really reading, when he heard it. Howling. Close. Familiar. Wyatt's heart stopped. He set down the book and stood, gripping the porch railing. Frost emerged from the tree line like a ghost, white coat brilliant in the fading sunlight. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came the grey and white female Wyatt had seen once before, moving with the cautious grace of a wild thing. And beside her, tumbling and playing and completely unafraid, were 4 pups. They were maybe 8 weeks old, their coats a mix of white and grey, their movements clumsy and curious. They chased each other in circles, pounced on imaginary prey, and completely ignored the human watching from the porch. Frost stopped at the edge of the clearing. The female hung back, clearly uncomfortable with proximity to the cabin, but the pups had no such concerns. They ventured closer, sniffing the air, ears perked with interest. Then, the smallest one, a pup with Frost's white coat and amber eyes, broke away from the others and bounded straight toward the porch. The female barked a warning, sharp and urgent, but Frost didn't move. He just watched as his pup climbed the porch steps and sat down directly at Wyatt's feet, tail wagging furiously. Wyatt slowly, carefully, knelt down. The pup sniffed his hand, then licked it, then play-bowed and yipped happily. "Hello there," Wyatt whispered. "Aren't you brave?" Frost made a sound low in his chest, half growl, half purr. He walked to the porch steps but didn't climb them. Instead, he touched his nose to Wyatt's outstretched hand, just for a moment, just long enough to say, "I remember. I remember everything." The pup played on the porch for 10 minutes, bringing Wyatt sticks and pine cones, wrestling with his bootlaces, completely content in the presence of this strange 2-legged creature. The other pups, emboldened, ventured closer too, though they stayed in the yard. When Frost finally called them back with a soft bark, they obeyed instantly. The little white pup looked back once, tail still wagging, before racing after her siblings. Frost held Wyatt's gaze for a long moment. In those amber eyes, Wyatt saw everything that couldn't be spoken. Gratitude. Trust. The acknowledgement that what they shared transcended the boundaries humans drew between wild and tame, animal and friend. Then Frost turned and led his family back into the forest, and Wyatt was alone again. But not really alone. Not anymore. Because every few weeks, sometimes more often, Frost would return. Sometimes with his mate. Sometimes with the pups, who grew bolder each visit. Sometimes alone, on nights when the moon was bright and the cabin lights were still on. He never stayed long, never crossed the threshold again. That first night had been necessity, a choice made in crisis. This was different. This was respect for boundaries, acknowledgement that Frost belonged to the wild now, fully and completely. But the visits continued, through summer and fall and into the next winter. Wyatt would leave food out sometimes, raw meat from his freezer. and it would be gone by morning. He'd find wolf tracks on the porch, proof that Frost had been there, even when Wyatt slept. Other rangers started reporting sightings. A white wolf spotted near Marker Point. A pack seen traveling through the valley, led by a massive white male. Tourists got photographs, grainy and distant, that went viral on social media. Mystery white wolf of Bitterroot became a local legend. Wildlife photographers camped for weeks trying to get a clear shot. Conservation groups debated protection status. The Forest Service received dozens of calls from people claiming they'd seen the wolf, asking if it was dangerous, asking if it should be relocated. Dutch called Wyatt one evening in November. "There's
pressure to tag that white wolf," he said carefully. "Track it. Study it. Some folks from the university want to run a full behavioral analysis."
"No," Wyatt said flatly. "Chen," I said, "no, leave him alone. He's not bothering anyone." There was a long pause. Then Dutch sighed. "I'll see what I can do. No promises." 2 weeks later, Dutch called back. "Don't know how, but the tracking proposal got killed. Some higher-up decided the wolf population was better left undisturbed." Another pause. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Wyatt, who had spent those 2 weeks writing letters to every conservation organization and government official he could find, said nothing. "Didn't think so," Dutch said, and Wyatt could hear the smile in his voice. December arrived with vengeance, bringing temperatures that hadn't been seen in Montana in 20 years. -40 became the new normal. The snow fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to 0 for days at a time. Roads closed, power lines snapped under the weight of ice. The Forest Service issued warnings to stay inside unless absolutely necessary. Wyatt's cabin became an island in a sea of white. He was snowed in for 6 days straight when the radio crackled to life on December 15th. Dutch's voice came through, tight with urgency and something that might have been fear. "Chen, you there? Come in, Chen." Wyatt grabbed the handset. "I'm here. What's wrong?" "We've got a situation. School bus went off Highway 93 near Sula. 16 kids, 2 adults. Bus rolled into a ravine and they're stranded. Temperatures dropping fast. We can't get helicopters up in this weather, and ground vehicles can't reach them. The access road is buried under 8 feet of snow." Wyatt's blood went cold. "How long do they have?" "Not long. Maybe 4 hours before hypothermia becomes critical. The bus heater's running, but they're low on fuel." "Chen, I know you're the closest ranger to that location, but with your leg—" "I'm going," Wyatt said flatly. "Wyatt, it's 7 miles through backcountry in whiteout conditions. Even if you could make it there, you can't evacuate 18 people alone." "I'm not alone," Wyatt said, and the words came out with absolute certainty. He didn't explain, didn't have time to explain. He grabbed his pack, loaded it with emergency supplies, heat packs, space blankets, everything he had. His leg throbbed as he strapped on his snowshoes, but he ignored it. 18 people were going to die if someone didn't reach them soon. Wyatt stepped out into the blizzard and was immediately hit by wind that stole his breath. He could barely see 10 feet ahead. The cold burned his exposed skin, even through his balaclava. This was suicide. This was madness. He started walking anyway. He'd made it maybe half a mile when he heard it. Barely audible over the howling wind, but unmistakable. A howl. Wyatt stopped, turned. Through the white curtain of falling snow, shapes materialized. 5 of them, moving with purpose through drifts that would have stopped any other animal. Frost led the pack, his white coat making him nearly invisible against the snow. The others followed in single file, using his body to break trail. They stopped 20 feet from Wyatt, and Frost stepped forward alone. "I need help," Wyatt said, knowing it was insane to talk to a wolf, knowing Frost couldn't possibly understand the complexity of what was happening. "There are children dying out there. I need to reach them, but I can't do it alone. Not in this." Frost's amber eyes held his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind screamed between them, carrying snow that stung like needles. Then Frost turned and started walking. Not back toward the cabin, but toward Highway 93, toward the ravine, toward the stranded bus. The other wolves fell in behind him, and Wyatt followed. What happened over the next 3 hours would become the subject of a documentary, 3 news specials, and endless debate among wildlife behaviorists, because 5 wolves and 1 injured ranger accomplished what should have been impossible. Frost led them on a route Wyatt would never have found on his own. The wolves seemed to sense where the snow was stable, where hidden obstacles waited, where the terrain would support their weight. They moved with confidence born from lifetimes in these mountains, and Wyatt followed in their tracks. When Wyatt fell, which happened 7 times before they reached the ravine, Frost was there, pulling him up by his jacket, waiting while he caught his breath, pressing against his side to share warmth when the shivering became too violent to control. They reached the ravine at 3:42 p.m., according to Wyatt's watch. The bus was visible below, lying on its side against a cluster of pines. Wyatt could see faces pressed against the windows, pale and terrified.
The descent was treacherous. The ravine wall was steep, covered in ice, unstable.
Wyatt started down, testing each foothold, moving with agonizing slowness. His injured legs screamed with every step. He was halfway down when his snowshoe caught on a hidden root. He fell hard, tumbling down the slope, unable to stop himself. His head cracked against something solid, and the world went white with pain. When his vision cleared, he was sprawled in the snow at the bottom of the ravine, blood running hot down his face. Above him, the wolves were descending. Not carefully like Wyatt had tried to do, but in controlled slides, using their bodies as sleds, moving with a grace that seemed impossible. Frost reached him first. The wolf nosed at Wyatt's head wound, whining softly. "I'm okay," Wyatt managed, though he definitely wasn't. His head was spinning, and his leg had twisted again in the fall. "The bus. We need to reach the bus." The bus was 30 yards away. Wyatt stood, using Frost for support, and limped toward it. The door was jammed shut, frozen or bent from the crash. Wyatt pounded on it. "Forest Service! I'm here to help!" A face appeared in the door window. A woman, maybe 35, with blood on her forehead and terror in her eyes. She saw Wyatt, saw the wolves behind him, and screamed. "It's okay!" Wyatt shouted. "They're with me! They're safe! Open the door!" The woman stared at him like he'd lost his mind, which, to be fair, he probably had. "Please," Wyatt said, "we don't have much time. Your heater won't last much longer, and night is coming. I need you to trust me." Maybe it was the desperation in his voice. Maybe it was the fact that the wolves weren't attacking, just sitting calmly in the snow watching. Maybe it was pure survival instinct. Whatever the reason, the woman started working on the door. It took 10 minutes of prying and kicking, but finally the door gave way with a shriek of metal. Warm air rushed out, along with the smell of diesel and fear, and too many bodies in too small a space. Wyatt climbed aboard. 16 children, ranging from maybe 6 to 14 years old, stared at him with wide eyes. The second adult, a man in his 50s, who was probably the bus driver, had a makeshift bandage wrapped around his arm. "The ranger station sent me," Wyatt said, which was technically true. "Are there any critical injuries?" The woman who'd opened the door shook her head. "Mostly bumps and bruises. Tom's arm might be broken, and Emily hit her head pretty bad, but everyone's conscious." "Good, that's good." Wyatt pulled out his radio and tried to raise Dutch. Nothing but static. The ravine walls were blocking transmission. "Okay, here's the situation. We can't wait for a helicopter. The weather's getting worse, and you're running out of heat. We need to get you to my cabin. It's 3 miles from here." 3 miles? The driver, Tom, looked horrified. These kids can't walk 3 miles in a blizzard. Half of them don't have proper
Winter gear. "I know." Wyatt took a breath. "That's why the wolves are going to help." The silence that followed was profound. "I'm sorry," the woman said slowly.
Did you just say wolves? 5 of them, outside. They led me here, and they're going to help lead us back. Wyatt could see the disbelief on their faces, the fear. I know how it sounds, but you're going to have to trust me, because it's our only chance. A small voice spoke up. Are they friendly wolves? Wyatt looked toward the voice. A girl, maybe 7 years old, with braids and glasses. Despite everything, despite the crash and the cold and the terror, she looked curious rather than afraid. Yes, Wyatt said. One of them is my friend. His name is Frost. The girl's eyes went wide. The White Wolf of Bitterroot. You've heard of him? Everyone's heard of him. My dad showed me pictures. She turned to the other kids. It's the famous White Wolf, the one that saved the ranger. And just like that, the atmosphere in the bus shifted. Fear became wonder. The children crowded toward the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of the wolves outside. Can we meet him? The girl asked. Wyatt smiled despite everything. Let's get you somewhere warm first, then maybe. Getting 18 people out of a crashed bus and ready to travel through a blizzard was chaos. Wyatt distributed every heat pack he had, wrapped the smaller children in space blankets, made sure everyone had something covering their faces and hands. Tom, the driver, pulled Wyatt aside. I can barely walk, he said quietly, gesturing to his injured arm. I'll slow everyone down. Then lean on me, Wyatt said. We all help each other, or we all die together. Those are the only options. When they finally emerged from the bus, the wolves were waiting. Frost sat at the front of the pack, patient and still. The children gasped. Several of the smaller ones clutched their teacher's hands. Okay, Wyatt addressed the group. Listen carefully. The wolves are going to break trail for us. They know where it's safe to walk. We follow in single file. Stay close together. Don't make sudden moves. If you fall, stay down until help comes. If you get separated, blow this whistle. He handed whistles to the 2 adults. Questions? Are you insane? Tom asked. Probably. Let's go. Frost stood and started walking. The pack fell in around him, creating a protective formation. Wyatt positioned himself at the back of the human line, making sure no one fell behind. The journey back was a nightmare and a miracle all at once. The wolves did exactly what Wyatt had hoped. They broke trail through the deep snow, their bodies creating a path the humans could follow. When the children got tired, which happened quickly, the wolves slowed their pace. When one of the smaller kids fell, exhausted and crying, one of the grey wolves actually came back and lay down beside the child, providing warmth and comfort until the child could continue. Halfway back,
Wind picked up to truly dangerous levels. Visibility dropped to 0. Wyatt could barely see the person in front of him, let alone the cabin he knew was still miles away. But Frost never hesitated. He led them on, sure-footed and confident, following some internal compass that couldn't be confused by wind or snow or darkness. The girl with braids, whose name was Sophie, walked near Wyatt. She'd been brave the whole journey, hadn't complained once despite being clearly exhausted. "Mr. Ranger," she said quietly, "how does Frost know where to go?" "I don't know," Wyatt admitted. "He just does." "My grandma says animals are smarter than people think. She says they know things we've forgotten how to know." "Your grandma sounds wise." "She is. She also says when an animal chooses to help you, it's because it sees something good in you, something worth saving." Wyatt felt his throat tighten. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Sophie looked up at him with serious eyes behind fogged glasses. "So Frost must think you're really good." Before Wyatt could respond, Frost stopped. The whole pack stopped. Through the swirling snow, Wyatt could just barely make out a shape ahead. The cabin. They'd made it. Getting 18 people inside a cabin built for one was like fitting a puzzle where none of the pieces matched. But somehow, everyone squeezed in. Wyatt got the wood stove roaring, distributed every blanket and sleeping bag he owned, made hot chocolate from his emergency supplies. The wolves didn't come inside. They took up positions around the cabin, creating a windbreak with their bodies, keeping watch like sentinels. Tom got the radio working and raised Dutch. "This is Tom Hargrove, driver of bus 47. We're safe, all 18 of us, thanks to Ranger Chen and—" He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. "And a pack of wolves." Dutch's response was unprintable. The helicopter evacuation came at dawn, when the storm finally broke. By then, the children had warmed up, injuries had been assessed and treated as best Wyatt could manage, and everyone had survived the night. As the first helicopter touched down, Wyatt stepped outside. The wolves were gone, tracks already filling with fresh snow. But on the porch, pressed into the powder, was a single clear print. Frost's print. Deliberate and unmistakable. Sophie appeared beside Wyatt, bundled in 3 of his jackets. "Will we see them again?" "I don't know," Wyatt said honestly. "I hope so. I want to say thank you." "I think they know." The evacuations took 4 helicopter trips. Wyatt went out on the last one, along with Tom and Sophie. As the helicopter lifted off, Wyatt pressed his face against the window, searching the tree line one more time. There, a flash of white among the pines. Frost stood watching, his pack gathered around him. As the helicopter banked, Frost threw back his head and howled, and the sound cut through even the rotor noise. Sophie grabbed Wyatt's hand. "He's saying goodbye." "No," Wyatt said softly. "He's saying see you soon." The media storm was immediate and overwhelming. "Wolves save school bus" dominated headlines for weeks. The story went national, then international. News crews camped outside Wyatt's hospital room. Documentary filmmakers offered money for exclusive rights. A children's book author wanted to write Frost's story. Wyatt refused all of it. What happened in those mountains wasn't for sale. It wasn't entertainment. It was sacred ground, a bond that transcended species, a trust that had been earned through pain and sacrifice, and choices made in moments when easy would have meant death. But he did agree to one interview. Local news, a small station in Missoula, and only because they promised the focus would be on avalanche safety and wilderness preparedness, not sensationalism. The interviewer, a young woman named Kara who'd done her research, asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Why do you think the wolves helped? What made them risk their lives for humans?" Wyatt thought about it for a long moment. Thought about a dying wolf in the snow, about amber eyes that held trust, about choices made from love rather than logic. "I think," he said finally, "that we underestimate animals. We put them in boxes, assign them behaviors, decide what they are and aren't capable of. But the truth is more complex. Animals feel, they remember. They form bonds that don't break just because we think they should." "So you believe the white wolf remembered you saving its life?" "I know he did. And I know that what we have goes beyond debt. It's friendship. It's family, even though we're different species. It's the recognition that some connections matter more than the categories we try to force them into." The interview aired on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, it had been viewed 2 million times online. By Friday, conservation groups across the country were citing it in campaigns to protect wolf populations. Dutch called that weekend, "Well, you've gone and done it now," made that wolf more famous than any of us will ever be. That wasn't the goal. I know, but maybe it's not a bad thing. People are talking about coexistence now instead of extermination, seeing wolves as something other than threats. Dutch paused. The university wants to establish a research grant, the Frost Foundation for Human-Wildlife Relations. They want you to consult. I'm not a scientist. No, but you've got something they don't. Experience, understanding, a relationship with the most famous wolf in North America. Another pause. Think about it. Could do a lot of good. Wyatt did think about it. Thought about it while recovering from his second surgery in a year. thought about it while relearning how to walk without pain shooting through his leg, thought about it during the long nights when he stared at the ceiling and wondered if he'd ever see Frost again. The answer came in February, exactly 1 year after Frost had returned to the wild. Wyatt was back at his cabin, cleared for light duty, but mostly existing in a liminal space between active ranger and permanent disability retirement. His leg would never be right. Too much damage, too many injuries. But he could walk, could manage the cabin, could still be useful, even if he couldn't do backcountry solo patrols anymore. He was sitting on the porch at dusk, watching the sun paint the snow pink and gold, when they came. Not just Frost this time. The whole pack, expanded now to 7 adults and 8 pups that were nearly full grown. They emerged from the tree line like a procession, moving with purpose. And in the middle of the pack, protected by the adults, were the 4 pups Wyatt had met last summer. Except they weren't really pups anymore. They were young wolves, gangly and curious and
brave. The smallest one, the white female with Frost's amber eyes, broke from the group and bounded to the porch. She sat at Wyatt's feet, tail wagging, and placed one paw on his knee. "Hello again," Wyatt said, his voice thick. "You've gotten big." Frost approached slowly, deliberately. He climbed the porch steps, something he'd done only once before, and sat down beside Wyatt. Not touching, but close. Close enough that Wyatt could feel the warmth radiating from his thick winter coat. They sat like that as the sun set and the stars emerged. The pack settled in the yard, comfortable and calm. The young wolves played, wrestling and chasing each other through the snow. "I'm thinking about the foundation," Wyatt said quietly. "Dutch told you about that, right?" He smiled at his own absurdity, talking to a wolf about career decisions. "They want to study you. Study us. Figure out how this happened so maybe it can happen again. Bridge the gap between human and wild." Frost's ears flicked. His amber eyes watched the playing pups. "But I told them I won't do it unless there are rules. No tagging, no tracking collars, no invasive studies. You're not a research subject. You're family. And family doesn't use family." The white pup climbed into Wyatt's lap, something she was far too big for now, and Wyatt laughed, despite the weight pressing on his injured leg. "They agreed," Wyatt continued. "Observation only. Photography from a distance. Behavioral studies that don't require interference. And all the research will focus on one question. How can humans create spaces where we coexist with wildlife instead of dominating it?" Frost turned his head and looked directly at Wyatt. In those eyes, Wyatt saw understanding, saw approval, saw something that might have been gratitude. "I'll take that as a yes," Wyatt said. They stayed until full dark, the pack and the ranger, existing together in comfortable silence. When Frost finally stood to leave, the white pup licked Wyatt's face and bounded after her father. At the tree line, Frost stopped and looked back. Just for a moment. Just long enough to acknowledge what they both knew. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A new chapter in a story that had started with blood in the snow and would continue for as long as wolves ran these mountains and humans were wise enough to respect the wild things that called this place home. Frost howled once, clear and bright, and disappeared into the darkness. His pack followed, their voices rising in a chorus that echoed through the valley like a promise, like a prayer, like a song that would outlast them both. Wyatt sat on the porch until the howling faded, then went inside to write the first chapter of what would become his life's work. The foundation launched that spring. The research it produced changed how conservation was practiced across North America. But that was the future. Tonight, Wyatt had everything he needed. A warm cabin, a purpose, and the knowledge that somewhere in these mountains, a white wolf ran free, leading his pack, teaching his young, living the wild life he was meant to live. And sometimes, when the moon was bright and the snow lay deep, that wolf would come home to the porch where his life had been saved, and sit beside the man who'd given him a second chance. Because some bonds transcended species. Some friendships couldn't be broken by distance or time. Some love was wild and free and completely, perfectly unconditional. 3 years passed. The Frost Foundation became one of the most respected wildlife research organizations in North America. Not because it had the biggest budget or the most prestigious scientists, but because it asked different questions and accepted different answers. Traditional wildlife biology operated on observation and data. The Foundation operated on observation, data, and something harder to quantify: respect. Every study was designed around minimal interference. Every research project required approval from an ethics board that included indigenous elders, wildlife rehabilitators, and Wyatt himself. They studied wolf communication patterns using audio recordings made from a mile away. They analyzed pack dynamics through careful observation of natural behaviors, never using drugged capture or radio collars. They documented human-wolf interactions in places where coexistence had worked, trying to understand what made those rare successes possible. And people listened, because at the heart of every presentation, every published paper, every grant proposal was a story that couldn't be denied or explained away. A story about a ranger and a wolf who had saved each other's lives, and in doing so, had proven that the line between wild and domestic was more permeable than anyone had believed. Wyatt became the Foundation's public face, despite his protests. He gave lectures at universities, spoke at conservation conferences, testified before congressional committees about wildlife protection. His limp was pronounced now, requiring a cane on bad days, but it lent him gravitas. Here was a man who'd been broken by the wilderness and healed by it, who'd lost everything and gained something more valuable. But his favorite work was with the children. Every summer, the Foundation ran wilderness camps for kids from urban areas, most of whom had never seen a wolf except in photographs. Wyatt would take them into the mountains, teach them tracking, show them how to read animal sign, help them understand that wild things weren't monsters to be feared or pets to be controlled, but neighbors to be respected. Sophie, the girl from the bus crash, was one of his junior counselors now. She was 14, whip-smart, planning to study wildlife biology in college. She'd never forgotten that night in the blizzard, and she'd made it her mission to help other kids experience what she called the magic of really seeing animals. On a warm July afternoon in Year 3, Sophie found Wyatt preparing for the evening campfire talk. The kids, 20 of them ranging from 8 to 15, were exploring the meadow near the Foundation's education center. Wyatt? Sophie's voice had that careful tone that meant she wanted something. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you think Frost would ever come if the kids were here? Not close, just close enough to see. Wyatt looked up from the firewood he was stacking. I can't control what Frost does, Soph. He's wild. He comes and goes on his own schedule. I know, but you could call him, couldn't you? You've done it before. Once. 2 years ago when those photographers were harassing his territory and I needed to warn him. It's not something I do casually. Sophie sat down on the log bench, her expression serious. There's a kid here, Marcus. He's from Chicago, never been outside the city except for this. His mom saved for 2 years to send him, and yesterday he told me that he used to be afraid of everything. The dark, loud noises, crowds. After his dad died, it got worse. But he read about Frost, read about how you and Frost helped each other, and he said it made him want to be braver. Wyatt felt something tighten in his chest. Soph. He asked me if Frost was real, if the stories were true, and I said yes, absolutely yes. But I think he needs to see it, needs to know that connection like that is possible, that being afraid doesn't mean you're weak, and that sometimes the scariest things turn out to be the most beautiful. Wyatt sat down beside her. You know what you're asking? I know it's a lot. And I know Frost doesn't perform for audiences. But this isn't about entertainment. It's about giving a scared kid hope. That evening, after the campfire stories and the s'mores and the constellation lessons,
Wyatt sent the kids to their tents with the counselors, all except Marcus, a small 10-year-old with dark skin, anxious eyes, and hands that never stopped fidgeting. "Marcus," Wyatt said, "want to take a walk?" The boy's eyes went wide. "At night? Best time to see wolves. They're crepuscular. That means active at dawn and dusk." They walked to the meadow's edge, where the forest began. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to paint everything in silver. Marcus stayed close to Wyatt, jumping at every sound. "Are you scared?" Wyatt asked. "A little," Marcus admitted. "Okay, a lot." "Good. Fear is smart. Fear keeps us careful. The trick is not letting it keep us from living." They sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley. For a long time they just listened. Crickets chirping, a distant owl calling, the wind moving through pine branches. "Mr. Wyatt?" Marcus said quietly. "Is Frost really your friend?" "Yes." "How did you know you could trust him?" Wyatt thought about that. "I didn't at first. I just knew he needed help, and I was the only one there to give it. Trust came later, built in small moments. Each time he could have hurt me and didn't. Each time I could have betrayed him and didn't." "Were you scared when you found him?" "Terrified. He was a wild animal, injured and in pain. Every instinct said stay back, call for help, don't get involved. But there was something in his eyes, a plea maybe, or recognition, like he knew I was his last chance." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "My dad died in a car accident. I was in the car. I was scared then too. So scared I couldn't move, couldn't talk. The EMTs had to pry my hands off the seatbelt." "I'm sorry, Marcus." "After that, I was scared of everything. Mom says it's trauma, that it's normal. But I don't want to be scared forever. I want to be brave like you." "I'm not brave," Wyatt said. "I'm terrified most of the time, of getting hurt again, of letting people down, of losing the things I love. Bravery isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing the thing anyway because it matters." "Is that why you saved Frost? Because it mattered?" "Yes." Marcus nodded slowly. Then, so quietly Wyatt almost missed it. "I wish I could meet him, just to say thank you for helping you, because your story helped me." Wyatt pulled out the wolf call he'd carved from cedar 3 years ago. He'd used it exactly twice before tonight. He put it to his lips and blew a long, low note that carried across the valley. They waited. 5 minutes. 10. Marcus's shoulders began to slump with disappointment. Then, from the tree line, came an answering call. Marcus gasped. Wyatt put a hand on his shoulder. "Stay very still. Don't make sudden movements. Just watch." Frost emerged from the shadows like something out of myth. His white coat seemed to glow in the moonlight. He was bigger than he'd been 3 years ago, filled out, with the muscle and confidence of a pack alpha in his prime. Behind him came 3 others, his mate Luna, the white pup who was now a young adult, and one of the grey males. They stopped at the edge of the meadow, 50 yards away, close enough to see clearly, far enough to feel safe. Frost looked directly at Wyatt, and even at this distance, those amber eyes were unmistakable. Then his gaze shifted to Marcus. The boy was frozen, barely breathing, tears streaming down his face. Frost sat. Luna sat. The young white female sat. The message was clear. We see you. We're not a threat. You're not a threat. We can exist in the same space. They stayed like that for maybe 3 minutes. Then Frost stood, huffed once, and led his small group back into the forest. Marcus didn't move for a full minute after they disappeared. Then he turned to Wyatt and whispered, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Yeah," Wyatt said, "it really was." Word spread, as word does. By the next morning, every kid in camp knew that Marcus had seen Frost. By the end of the week, Marcus was leading nature hikes, teaching younger kids how to identify wolf tracks. No longer the scared, quiet boy, but someone transformed by wonder. Sophie found Wyatt on the last day of camp as parents arrived for pickup. "You changed that kid's life." Frost changed it. I just made an introduction. No, you saw what he needed and you provided it. That's teaching. That's healing. She paused. That's what the Foundation is really about, isn't it? Not just protecting wolves, protecting the possibility of connection. Wyatt smiled. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. But not everything was peaceful. Success brought scrutiny, and scrutiny brought opposition. That fall, a ranching coalition filed a lawsuit against the Foundation, claiming that Wyatt's romanticization of wolves was encouraging dangerous human-wildlife interaction. They pointed to increased wolf sightings near populated areas, arguing that wolves were losing their natural fear of humans because of the Foundation's work. The lawsuit was frivolous and would eventually be dismissed, but it created tension. Protesters showed up at Foundation events. Wyatt received death threats. Someone spray-painted "Wolf Lover" on his truck in letters 3 feet high. Dutch, now retired but still deeply involved with the Foundation, called it for what it was. They're scared of change. Scared that if people start seeing wolves as complex beings instead of livestock killers, they'll lose the right to shoot them on sight. They're not entirely wrong, Wyatt said. Some wolves do kill livestock. And some humans kill wolves. Some humans kill other humans. We don't judge entire species by their worst members. We create systems that allow coexistence while minimizing conflict. Dutch sighed. This fight isn't going away, Chen. You need to be ready for it to get uglier. It got uglier. In November, someone left a dead wolf on
the Foundation's doorstep with a note. This is what happens to animals that forget their place. Wyatt spent that night on his cabin porch, rifle across his knees, watching the tree line. Not because he thought Frost was in danger. Frost's territory was deep wilderness, far from roads or ranches. But because anger makes people reckless, and reckless people do terrible things. Frost came that night, alone, moving through the darkness like a ghost. He climbed the porch steps and sat beside Wyatt, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Someone killed one of your kind," Wyatt said quietly. "Left him like garbage to send a message." Frost's ears were back, his body tense. He knew. Maybe he'd found the body before the Foundation staff did. Maybe he'd scented the death on Wyatt. Either way, he knew. "I don't know how to protect you from this. From people who hate what they don't understand. From fear that turns into violence." Wyatt's voice cracked. "I saved you once, but I can't save you from humanity's worst impulses. I wish I could." Frost turned his head and pressed his nose against Wyatt's temple. The gesture was so gentle, so clearly intentional, that Wyatt felt tears spill over. They sat like that until dawn, a man and a wolf, keeping vigil for the dead, sharing grief in the way grief is best shared, in silence, in presence, in the simple act of not being alone. The Foundation's response to the threats was not to back down, but to double their efforts. They launched an education campaign targeting ranching communities, showing data on non-lethal predator deterrence. They partnered with progressive ranchers who'd found ways to coexist with wolves. They funded research into livestock guardian dogs and improved fencing techniques. Slowly, grudgingly, some minds began to change. A rancher in Idaho shared a video of his guardian dogs peacefully coexisting with a wolf pack that denned near his property. "Lost 0 cattle this year," he said in the video. "Turns out if you respect their territory, they respect yours." A teenager in Wyoming started a social media campaign about wolves, sharing photos and facts that went viral. "They're not monsters," she wrote. "They're family animals who mate for life, who play with their pups, who mourn their dead. They're us, just shaped different." The tide was turning. Not everywhere, not quickly, but turning nonetheless. Wyatt's 41st birthday came on a cold December morning. He woke to find tracks on his porch, 4 sets of wolf prints, carefully placed in a line leading to his door. Frost and his grown pups had visited in the night, leaving tracks like a birthday card. Wyatt stood on the porch with his coffee, studying the prints, and felt something settle in his chest. Contentment, maybe. Or purpose. The knowledge that his life had amounted to something that mattered. His radio crackled. Dutch's voice. "Chen, you there?" "Morning, Dutch. What's up?" "Got a call from a wildlife officer in Glacier National Park. They've got a situation. Young wolf caught in illegal snare, badly injured. The wolf is, well, she's white. Really white. And she's got a pup with her that won't leave her side." Wyatt's blood went cold. "Where?" "Near Lake McDonald. They can't tranquilize her because of the injury and the pup. Ask if we knew anyone with experience handling white wolves." A pause. "I told them you'd be there in 3 hours." Wyatt was moving before Dutch finished talking, grabbed his medical kit, threw it in the truck, radioed the Foundation office to clear his schedule. The drive to Glacier was 2.5 hours if he pushed it. He made it in 2 hours and 15 minutes. The wildlife officer, a young woman named Torres, met him at the trailhead. "Thank God you're here. We've been watching her for 6 hours. The snare is cutting into her front leg. She's lost a lot of blood, but every time we get close she gets agitated and the pup gets aggressive." "Show me." They hiked in a mile. When they reached the site, Wyatt's heart stopped. It was the young white female from Frost's pack. The brave one who'd climbed on his porch as a pup, who'd sat on his lap when she was too big for it, who'd watched the campers with curious amber eyes. She was lying on her side, panting heavily, a wire snare buried deep in her left foreleg. Beside her, a pup, maybe 12 weeks old, paced frantically, whining. The young female's eyes locked on Wyatt. Recognition flared in them, followed by something that looked desperately like hope. "Everyone back," Wyatt said quietly. "Give me space to work." "Sir, that's not protocol." "I don't care about protocol. That wolf knows me, she trusts me. And right now trust is the only thing that's going to save her life." Torres hesitated, then nodded. She and her team retreated 50 yards. Wyatt approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in a low, calm voice. "Hey, sweetheart, remember me?" "Yeah, I thought you might. We're going to fix this, okay? But you need to let me close." The young wolf, he really needed to give her a name, he thought absurdly, didn't growl. The pup did, a tiny, fierce sound from something that weighed maybe 20 pounds. "Easy, little one. I'm here to help." He knelt in the snow 3 feet away. The young wolf's breathing was labored, her gums pale. Severe blood loss, shock setting in. He had maybe 30 minutes before organ failure became irreversible. "I need to touch you," Wyatt said. "It's going to hurt. I'm sorry." He moved closer. The wolf's tail twitched, not a wag, but not aggression either. Acknowledgement maybe, or resignation. Wyatt examined the snare. Illegal design, meant to kill, not catch. The wire had cut through fur and skin, was embedded in muscle. He'd need to cut it carefully to avoid severing an artery. "Torres!" he called. "I need wire cutters, antiseptic, and gauze, now." She brought them herself, moving slowly, keeping her eyes averted from the wolf's gaze. Smart. Direct eye contact was threatening. Wyatt worked fast. Cutting the snare was agonizing. Every adjustment made the wolf whimper. The pup pressed against its mother, crying. When Wyatt finally got the wire free and began cleaning the wound, the young wolf's eyes rolled back and she passed out. "Is she dead?" Torres whispered. "No. Shock. Better this way. She won't feel the worst of it." He cleaned the wound, packed it with antiseptic, wrapped it tight. The leg would need surgery, probably pins to stabilize the bone. But she'd live. She'd live if he could get her to a facility fast enough. Torres was already calling for a helicopter. Vet team standing by in Kalispell. ETA 20 minutes. The pup wouldn't leave its mother's side during the evacuation. Torres tried to separate them and got bitten for her efforts. Finally, Wyatt said, "Let them stay together. She'll be calmer with the pup close." They airlifted both wolves to Kalispell. The surgery took 4 hours.
Wyatt paced the waiting room, ignoring calls, ignoring the news crews that had somehow gotten wind of White Wolf Rescue 2.0. The vet finally emerged, exhausted but smiling. She's going to make it. The leg will heal, but she'll have reduced mobility. She won't be able to keep up with a pack hunting large prey. Wyatt's stomach dropped. So she can't go back to the wild. Not safely. She'd starve or get killed by another predator. She needs sanctuary placement. No. The word came out sharp. No sanctuaries. Mr. Chen, I understand your feelings about captivity, but she's not going in a cage. I'll take her. The vet blinked. You can't just take a wolf home. Watch me. I've got permits for wildlife rehabilitation through the foundation. I've got the space, the resources, the experience. She knows me, trusts me. If she can't be wild, at least she can be free range on protected land. It took 3 days of paperwork, permits, and arguments with wildlife officials, but in the end, they approved it. The young white wolf and her pup would live at Wyatt's cabin under Foundation custody, monitored but not caged, wild but not alone. He named her Aurora. The pup, a female, he named Hope. Bringing them home felt like closing a circle. Wyatt set up a large enclosure around his cabin, but he left the gate open. Aurora could leave whenever she wanted. She chose to stay. Frost visited 2 days after Aurora came home. He approached cautiously, scenting the air, processing the presence of his daughter and granddaughter on Wyatt's land. Aurora limped to the fence line. Frost stood on the other side. Father and daughter touched noses through the wire, and Frost made a sound Wyatt had never heard before, low and mournful and achingly tender. "She's safe," Wyatt told him. "I promise. She's safe here." Frost looked at him with those amber eyes, and Wyatt felt the weight of that gaze down to his bones. Trust, absolute and terrifying. Then Frost did something that made Wyatt's breath catch. He walked to the gate, the open gate, and stepped through, into the enclosure, onto Wyatt's land, crossing a boundary he'd never crossed before. He went to Aurora and lay down beside her. Hope, brave little Hope, climbed over her grandfather without fear, biting his ears and tail. Frost tolerated it with what could only be described as patient amusement. They stayed like that for an hour. A family, reunited in a place between wild and domestic, protected by a human who'd proven himself worthy of protecting them. When Frost finally left, he paused at the gate, looked back at Aurora, at Hope, at Wyatt. Then he howled, and his pack answered from the mountains, and Aurora howled with them, and Hope tried to howl, but mostly just made adorable yipping sounds, and Wyatt stood in the middle of it all, feeling like his heart might burst from the beauty of it. 5 years later, on a frozen January morning, Wyatt woke to silence. Not the normal quiet of winter, but something deeper, more complete. The kind of silence that meant something was very wrong. He pulled on clothes and stepped outside. Aurora and Hope, both fully grown now, were at the fence line staring into the forest. Their body language was rigid, alert. "What is it?" Wyatt asked. Then he saw them, dozens of wolves, more wolves than should exist in one place, from packs that should be territorial enemies. They stood in a massive semicircle at the tree line, all of them facing the cabin. Frost sat at the center, and Wyatt's heart dropped when he saw how thin the white wolf had become, how his movements were stiff and careful. Wyatt walked to the fence. Aurora whined low in her throat. Frost stood and walked forward, and the other wolves followed. Not just his pack, but wolves from across the entire region. Greys and blacks and browns, young and old, all moving in silent procession. They stopped at the fence line. Frost was in front, his amber eyes locked on Wyatt's face. And then, one by one, every wolf sat. Dozens of them, sitting in formation like an honor guard. Wyatt's hands were shaking. "Frost? What is this?" Frost's tail wagged once, weak but deliberate. Then he lay down, right there at the fence, and closed his eyes. Understanding hit Wyatt like a physical blow. No, not yet. Please. But Frost's breathing was already slowing, becoming shallow. He was old, Wyatt realized. 9 years old, ancient for a wild wolf. His body was giving out, and he'd come here to die, had brought every wolf whose life he'd touched to witness. Wyatt dropped to his knees in the snow, hands pressed against the fence that separated him from his oldest friend. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for trusting me, for teaching me, for showing the world that connection is possible." Frost's eyes opened one last time. In them, Wyatt saw no pain, no fear, just peace, just gratitude, just love. Then Frost exhaled softly and didn't inhale again. The wolves began to howl, all of them together, a sound that echoed across the mountains and valleys, a song of mourning and celebration, grief and gratitude. Aurora and Hope howled with them, and Wyatt, tears freezing on his face, threw back his head and howled too, adding his voice to the chorus, saying goodbye in the only language that mattered. The wolves stayed until sunset, keeping vigil. Then, one by one, they stood and melted back into the forest. But they left something behind. At the fence line, arranged in careful formation, were gifts. A perfect deer antler, a river stone worn smooth, an eagle feather, pine cones, interesting bones, each item placed deliberately, offerings from wolves who'd learned that humans could be trusted, could be partners, could be family. And in the center of it all, a single white pup sat waiting. She was maybe 8 weeks old, with Frost's amber eyes and coat so white it seemed to glow. She looked at Wyatt and wagged her tail. Wyatt picked her up carefully, and she licked his face. Around her neck was a collar made of braided grass, and attached to it was a small metal tag that hadn't been there when the wolves arrived. Wyatt turned it over, and his breath stopped. Engraved in careful letters, "From Frost, legacy continues." But that wasn't possible. Wolves couldn't make metal tags, couldn't engrave words. Unless... Wyatt looked up at the forest, at the shadows between the trees, and standing there, barely visible in the fading light, was a figure, human, watching. The figure raised one hand in a wave, then stepped back and disappeared. Wyatt stood frozen, the pup squirming in his arms, his mind reeling. Someone had been watching all along. Someone who understood what Frost meant, what the bond between them meant. Someone who'd made sure the legacy would continue. He'd never know who, never know if they were friend or observer or something else entirely. But as he carried the pup inside, as Aurora and Hope crowded close to sniff their new family member, as the last light faded from the sky, Wyatt realized it didn't matter. Frost's story wasn't ending. It was multiplying, spreading, becoming something larger than one man and one wolf. It was becoming hope.